Hello, hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Red Pilled Fiction Factory from a not too hot Yucatan, Mexico. Today's guest comes from an equally unhot place, I imagine, Plymouth in England. His name is Steve Stark, and he's written a terrific zombie horror thriller called A Hot Dose of Hell, which is not for the squeamish, but highly recommended. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hi, Richard. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. What's the weather like there in Plymouth?
A bit overcast today. A little bit of rain. Typical British weather, really.
For those who don't know, Plymouth is in a very nice part of the English country side in the southwest, and I don't know much about the city, but around there's some lovely areas. Now, your book is set in Plymouth is also a coastal town, a city.
It is, yeah.
And your book is set in a fictional version of a British seaside resort called Scarmouth.
That's right.
Are you basing it, which I presume is a combination of the words Great Yarmouth and Scarborough, two well-known British resorts, but they're not very attractive, and Scarmouth obviously doesn't sound very attractive either. Is it based on Plymouth, or is it sort of just a random?
It's actually not. I've only recently moved to Plymouth, so it's based on the town I grew up in and the towns around that area. There's lots of, all around, as you know, the southwest, there's lots of little coastal towns, and they're little tourist traps at one time, but then a lot of them have gone to pot, unfortunately.
Yes, I think this is an important point for non-British readers. I was going to make this point. You normally think of seaside resorts and towns as rather charming, quaint, entertaining places to be. But in Britain's case, somehow we managed to turn them into, well, great settings for horror stories, basically. With a few exceptions, they tend to have fallen from grace and become almost parodies of what they once were, which were elegant, safe, prosperous towns, to become quite the opposite. So tell us about your background. And you've always been from the southwest of England, you say? You were born there? Grew up there?
I have. Yeah. So I grew up all around the southwest. It's nice with the beaches and everything, and my childhood was pretty nice. Everyone plays outside, and you'd spend most of your time riding around on bikes and kind of getting into trouble. I used to go tombstoning a lot, play basketball, lots of outdoor stuff there, which is pretty good. And then as you get older, there's not a lot of opportunities in those towns, so you find yourself, very limited with what you can do there. One of the main industries was the nightclub and pub industry, which, for sort of 5 to 6 months of the year is very booming, and then the rest of the year there's nothing else. It was all about tourism where I grew up, really. So you'd struggle for 6 months of the year, then have loads of work for 6 months.
And your schooling was there. Did you go on after school towards university or anything like that?
I didn't, no. I went to college, did my 2 years, got my A-level, and then just started working from there. I was already working in bars when I was still at school. I was working in a nightclub as a glass collector when I was 15. Me and 3 of my friends used to do that, so we kind of grew up around that, really.
And are you still in the tourist trade, or are you
No, I work fairly normal 9 to 5 now, actually. I worked, after working in the clubs for a short period of time, once I was old enough, I went on the bar, and then from the bar I went into doing the security side of things. And I did that for over 10 years. And then when I met my wife, she helped me get into a more normal kind of work in a 9 to 5 job.
So when you say security, you were a bouncer for 10 years?
I was indeed, yeah.
Crikey, you must have seen some things, which probably gives you some of the inspiration for what happens in the book.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of fights going on in those days as well. It's sort of the time when binge drinking was at its peak, I would say.
I didn't know it had peaked, but yeah, okay.
It felt like it anyway. I feel like the younger people now are a little bit more calmer, a little bit more restrained.
They're probably all on drugs, aren't they?
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah.
And at what point in your evolution did you think of writing? Well, obviously, I'm sure you, from having read the book, I'm sure you got a lot of material from your work as a bouncer. And did the book come first, or did the material come first? Were you looking to write anyway, or all this stuff started piling up in your head and you felt you needed to download it?
Yeah, it kind of was that. It was all piling up in my head and I needed to download it. I'd always liked writing. I'd always enjoyed it. It was one of the few subjects at school I enjoyed. I liked English and I liked PE, and that was about it. Everything else in between felt like a waste of time. So I'd always enjoyed writing, and I'd quietly write random little stories to myself, just off the cuff, no prompts or anything like that. I just feel like writing something down. And I never shook that kind of urge. It would always sort of creep up on me and I'd want to write something. So yeah, I started out with short stories and dabbling with that. And then this story sort of came to me as, like I say, it's a combination of lots of different things in my life and lots of things I've experienced in sin.
I will say that it draws in a lot of different threads, as we'll come to discuss shortly. It's a zombie horror, but there's quite a nice undercurrent of anti-woke, anti-PC dialogue and narrative involved.
Yeah.
There's also other little asides that surprise me. The nature of heroism is explored to some degree. The decline of modern society by default is a feature throughout. And it's all very well and sensitively handled so that it doesn't offend anyone, I don't think, nor does it, do you miss the point? It's sufficiently clear. But
that's good to know.
No, you did it very well in that sense. Now, were you red-pilled all the time? Or, I use the term red-pilled, as I'm sure you understand, as sort of non-woke, non-PC.
Yeah.
Or did that evolve over the years as you were beating people over the head with a truncheon in the nightclubs?
I think I always was, very much so. Yeah, I never liked PC type stuff. It's fakeness. It's kind of, I don't know, exactly that. It's fakeness is what always bothered me about PC type stuff. I've always had an issue with what I consider unearned authority, and sort of the PC stuff has just kind of bled into everything. And I'd say that the PC stuff has had a massively detrimental effect in lots of ways.
There's no doubt about that. Now, where did this come from? Was it just it's spontaneous within you, or did the family have an influence on you, or was it a book you read or something like that? Where does it come from, this anti-PC feeling of your strength?
Yeah, I think my mum is very much a bit of a rebel and a very independent-minded person, and she didn't mind ever, doesn't mind telling anyone what she thinks, whether she's right or wrong. So I think I probably learned a bit of that from her. She probably encouraged me to be the same and to sort of stand up to people if I disagreed with them.
Okay, and the book itself, right? I'm going to give some context here. As I say, it's a Hot Dose of Hell is the name. It came out just a year ago, I think, set in an imaginary Scarmouth, which in itself is just terrific choice of name. The blurb reads, "A deadly new drug has hit the streets of Scarmouth, one which turns users into bloodthirsty maniacs with superhuman tolerance for pain." Excuse me. Through insidious design, a large quantity has fallen into the hands of squatters occupying the derelict Victoria Hotel. It's a bad place for a group of woke, virtue signaling social media influencers to promote their new homeless charity, but they've got a PR story in the making. One of their party is searching for a long-lost sister, and if they can find her, they believe the stunt could bring them international attention. They're not the only ones looking for something, however. Hired muscle Fred and Pinky have been tasked to recover the lost drug shipment. These men know what it's doing to people. What they don't know is just how many have been affected already. But within the bowels of that derelict hotel breeds a mindless homicidal legion. And that is the setting. So would you give us a sort of brief resume as you see it, how the story unfolds, without giving away any of I will say there's a terrific twist at the end, but without giving all of that away. How do you describe the story, the plot line?
Yeah, I always find this hard to sum up. So yeah, it's about these woke idiots basically who are purely about promoting themselves, and they've seen this opportunity to have a big PR stunt and get all their social media likes, and they've traveled to this town not knowing that what's going on at the time, not knowing that this drug has suddenly sort of come in, and that all these guys are taking it and zombieing out basically. At the same time, a couple of a criminal group catch wind that this is going on and send a couple of their guys to try and clean it up, because they know it's going to bring them a lot of negative attention. It's going to cause problems for them when police and whoever start, investigating the town and looking for what's going on with this drug and where it's come from. So they're trying to quietly deal with it. And it all comes to a head at the hotel that you mentioned, where a lot of them are there already taking the drug, already affected by it, and these two groups kind of stumble into this whole thing.
Yes, the Victoria Hotel is an abandoned, elegant edifice on top of the hills behind Scarmouth, and I warn anyone who ever finds Scarmouth on their itinerary not to go inside this hotel. What follows is your writing style is very visual, so it's not difficult to imagine it as a film at all, and it is quite a scary experience that they go through, trying to get to the core of what's going on in this horrible hotel. And I congratulate you, because I find it very difficult to write action scenes, if I can, over 2 pages, let's say. I think that's quite a challenge to me. But you seem to have written 200 pages without any pause for breath. It's non-stop action, and very skillfully done. You chose horror because, why did you choose horror as the genre, as opposed to making this a more bleak, because it could easily have been a more bleak, sort of realistic, sort of documentary style novel, but obviously you chose horror for a reason. Why is that?
Yeah, I wanted people to have fun with it at the same time. I wanted it to be something that was enjoyable while also making a point. I also think that when you turn the situation up to that crazy life and death threat, it makes it all the more obvious how these people are going to react, and what they're really about. I found from my history that you really find out what people are actually about when something big happens, when there's something violent, when there's an emergency going on. You see, hidden characteristics come out of people, I think. There's people who step up to be heroic at times, and there's people who pretend to be the most wonderful, lovely, caring people who will run the other direction and not even think about trying to help somebody else. And I think that's what I wanted to explore. Yeah,
and you did. And we've seen this more and more. It's become clearer and clearer at that point in the last few years with what's been going on. We've been let down badly by the people we treated with the most respect, and people we ignored, paid no attention to, have stepped up to the plate. So yes, and that's a good point, and well explored in the novel. I'm going to give an excerpt here from we haven't mentioned it, the heroine in the book,
Oh, yeah.
she reminds me a bit of the woman, John Connor's wife, is it, in the Terminator? She's a normal woman who works at a sort of B&Q type place, night shifts, nothing, there's no heroic dimension to it at the beginning, but she's keeps herself fit and finds herself thrown into the deep end when she goes to look for her long lost sister in this town,
Yeah.
who's one of the victims of the drug. And anyway, she's, rather than go on her own, she's hooked up with these virtue signaling Instagram types. And a lot of the great lines in your book are just here and there, and they don't all come together. So it's difficult to select them for quoting. But the scene where she meets them gives everyone a good idea of where you're coming from and how cleverly you can portray them. So she's walked into a pub where she's going to meet them. And they're all sitting at a table. One of the males exhaled a jet of white smoke in her direction. On reflex, she scowled. Her laser glare locked onto him, and in turn, he gave a gormless, open-mouthed smile. Then he raised the Pokeball-shaped e-cig in a very deliberate fashion, almost like he intended it as a statement. But of what, Rhonda had no clue. "What's up?" he said. A quick appraisal told her that the bloke wasn't hostile, just awkward. He'd hidden his frail body in the garb of a lumberjack, topping off the incongruence with thick-rimmed specs and a straw trilby, which he clearly hoped would be a conversation starter, just like the Pokemon e-cig. "All right, mate," she grunted back. To reclaim the attention, Poppy, who's the head of the Instagrammers, made a dramatic gesture with her hand. "This is Rhonda, everyone," she said, then motioning to the other male on her right. "Rhonda, this is Kibsy, or Kibs for short." This Kibs was so similar in look to the lumberjack that they could have been brothers. The extensive sailor tattoos and She-Ra vest beneath his flannel shirt were the only giveaway Rhonda wasn't looking at an exact double. He even made the same uncanny, open-mouthed smile. "Hey, hey," he said, while Rhonda gave a slight nod, her lack of enthusiasm obvious. There you are. You've captured the modern metrosexual male.
Yeah.
Very well there. And even, have you heard of the soy grin, the soy boy grin?
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going for there. Yeah, the Soylent grin.
It's great to see this sort of thing coming out in fiction, because we see it, people like you and me, on the internet all the time, but it's very much a positive world. And it's high time this sort of thing became part of the public marketplace, if you like, for ideas. And the fact that you're doing it is a terrific asset to tribute to both you and the book. Do you have much experience of this kind of thing in daily life, in your work? Maybe you're not a social worker or anything like that.
No, nothing like that, luckily. But yeah, you do every so often. You're at a party or something like that, and there's someone there who is that way, or in any workplace, there always seems to be one of them. They don't tend to last very long in any workplace. I've noticed those kind of people. They're normally full of anxiety and complaints and sort of get pushed out the door after a while. But yeah, you do encounter the odd one, unfortunately.
The odd one, I'd say it was the overwhelming majority these days.
But yeah, the internet certainly makes it seem that way, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it does. But also daily flicking through the newspapers or anything, there's no shortage of them, let's put it that way. They seem to be everywhere and on the rise at the same time.
Yeah.
So your personal life doesn't bring you. I thought maybe because of the depth of knowledge you seem to portray in the book, I thought maybe you'd had experience directly with these things, and nor with drug addiction or homelessness. That's just
not personally, yeah. But sort of part of my transition from nightclub work into normal 9-to-5 work was to shift into doing daytime security. And I took a job for, it's about 3 years. I was working in a big chain place that I won't name, and inside it had a pharmacy, and I was there as a sort of plainclothes security officer, and the majority of my job was to pretty much just deal with drug addicts, because this pharmacy was providing methadone and needle exchange and things like that, and it was right in the city centre. So all my day was just sort of watching these guys on the cameras coming up and down the stairs, going to the pharmacy, getting their stuff and going, and just making sure they weren't causing any trouble. In the process of doing that, you get to know a lot of them, you get to know their stories, especially when you have to detain some of them, and you're having to keep them in a room for however long before the police decide to show up. I once got stuck in a room with one of them for, I think it was about 5 hours before the police showed up. It was the majority of my shift. So you get to talking to them and hearing their stories, basically, and you know all the ins and outs, because they can't wait to tell you, to have real conversations with people as well sometimes. They kind of want you to understand, but at the same time, a lot of them were quite dangerous people as well, as also highlighted in the book.
Well, it's a very interesting combination, because it is at times laugh out loud funny, and I did laugh out loud, and I'm still laughing out loud at some memories from the book. Yet it's set in this sort of horrific, bleak world, and you managed to somehow balance that so that it's sensitively done, and you're not so much laughing at them as at the broken system. And it's a kind of gallows humor. You have to find something to alleviate, to make light of this desperate situation so many are in. Were you influenced along the way by any particular writers? Someone in the Amazon reviews mentions likenesses to Guy N. Smith, Sean Hudson, James Herbert, who I've heard of, but the others I haven't.
Yeah.
And John and Craig Spector. Was that sort of meat and two veg to you, that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. James Herbert, Sean Hudson, Clive Barker. They were definitely big influences on me. Yeah. Lots of crime fiction as well, though. James Ellroy, Richard Stark, who's also Donald Westlake. That's his pen name.
Richard Stark is an absolute genius, and Donald Westlake. You're the first person I think who's mentioned him on this show, and
oh, really?
I'm an massive fan. And I've read everything I've got my hands on several times. He's brilliant. But go on.
Yeah. I've read the majority of the Parker books. I still haven't got through them all. But yeah, he's great.
They're quite hard to get. Yeah. They're quite hard to get. I think they keep being reissued, and if they ever do, I highly recommend anyone buy them all. Buy them all in one go, because you're going to want them all once you've read one.
Yeah, definitely. Other influences were Irvine Welsh, I would say, just for the way he describes these grotesque situations, with that dark humor, but also a little bit of a sort of sentimental touch at times as well. And I don't know, maybe Bret Easton Ellis as well, American Psycho. Yeah.
Very interesting. I can see yes, I can see a lot of that coming through now that you mention it. Here's another passage from the book. It's about the language and the way these Instagrammers and influencers seem to talk these days. And this is the heroine thinking, reflecting on them. Sometimes it seemed like they were speaking another language. So many phrases she'd never heard, acronyms she couldn't decipher. It was all phobe this and ist that. Talk of allies, gender, feminism, patriarchy, oppression, misogyny, empowerment, the far right. Everything seemed to be problematic, or at least inappropriate. And there was an ongoing, unofficial competition to see who could categorize the most innocuous things under either of these two brackets. The listener will be pleased to hear that there's no happy ending for the Instagrammers. pretty much their worst nightmares come true. And in this case, they do have would be justified in squealing and screaming like they do all through their lives. Talk about the two well, so there's two hard men in this film, Fred and Pinky. Pinky's, I think, Polish, Pinkowitz, and they are terrific. Not really minor characters, but they don't have hog the headlines either. They're there throughout, and it's a great little duet that they play. This comes from type of people you used to work with in the nightclubs and stuff, or?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's little bits of lots of people in there. Freddie's little bits of every sort of old veteran that I worked with, you know. Hard as nails, a little bit past it, but has seen a lot of stuff and actually has quite a lot of wisdom to share, and usually a wicked sense of humor as well, you find. And Pinky, a lot of the interactions with Pinky is, I worked with a guy where he was Polish, and we were often having the sort of the strange, you know, where he wasn't understanding the culture. You know, I'd make references to him all the time, and he wouldn't know what the hell I was talking about. You know, and we had quite a bit of fun together. So yeah,
again, that's a modern touch, because 20 years ago it would have been very unusual to have a Pole in any sort of English literature, probably. But the world has shifted a lot, and now there's plenty of them throughout the workforce in the UK, and a lot of them are doing exactly this kind of hard grafting work, which the Brits have sort of opted out of. And Fred, I think, is symbolic of that. He's kind of the dying past that, like you say, veteran that's probably missing in a lot of British society. Yeah. He's being replaced by foreign muscle, who's doing a pretty good job at it too. There's a very, without giving too much away, towards the end, I really like this passage where Fred, realizing that one of them has to give up his life to keep the others, give the others a chance, goes through the sort of classic scene from the war movies and stuff, where he tells them to go on while he holds off the zombie hordes.
Yeah.
And it's very touching, considering we're in the middle of this gore fest of a horror thing with zombies everywhere. And anyway, this is Fred speaking. "I'm not daft, mate," said Fred. "I know how this will turn out. At least if I hang on, you'll have a bit of time to get away." He passed the keys to Pinky, and all of a sudden those keys seemed much heavier in Pinky's palm. He thought to throw them back, but didn't. Dire as the situation was, Fred seemed to have accepted it with an air of stoicism. It stood as an example of the mythic British resolve Pinky had heard about, yet never witnessed until that very moment. Out of respect and a sense of logic, Pinky had to accept it too, no matter how much he hated it. And then Fred says, I will substitute a C word here somewhere along that. Anyways, fuck off, will you, Pinks? I can't keep him out much longer. Just name your kid after me, eh? And make sure he doesn't grow up to be a beep. Pinky gave an earnest nod. He'd keep that promise. Yeah, I must stress for the listener, the book is chock full of little asides like that, which are very nicely, sensitively put in, and together you could, if you collated them, you'd have pages and pages of outstanding lines of narrative. And considering this is your first book, right?
Yeah.
Steve?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Considering this is your first book, I was super impressed. I think don't know how you managed it so well. Speaking of that, then, so have you written? But you haven't written any other fiction, but you have written for horror magazines, you were telling me, or websites.
Yeah, a couple of websites like whatculture.com, which is a fairly well-known one. They do lots of like top 10 horror lists and things like that. So I did a handful of them, just for an experiment, really, just so I could have something on my CV. And for an independent company called No Sellout Productions, I did 2 articles for them as well. And I've had a 3 short stories published with a company called Hellbound Books as well.
Did you try and sell A Hot Dose of Hell to the publishing market?
No.
Well, I know in a way
I
it
feel-
sounds ridiculous, but I think you could sell this. This is very, well, for a start, as I say, it's well done. It's not a diatribe, it's not a rant, it's not offensive, I don't think, beyond the, obviously those who will be offended by everything will be offended, but
I've had a bit of that, actually. I have every so often come across someone who is offended by it.
well, there's always going to be that.
Through.
But it is remarkably accessible, I think, to the vast majority of people. Many books that I review aren't. And it's so filmic, and also I think it could be done on a fairly modest budget. So I do think that if it was made into film, I do think that there's room for manoeuvre there. And if I were you, I would explore it a bit, because it seems to just slide right into a kind of the idea of what we go and see at the cinema these days.
Yeah.
So you've written for other horror movies, magazines, and are you going to write another novel?
I've got. I'm putting together a little trilogy of stories at the moment, novella-length stories, and I've got ideas for another couple as well. I've got one that I may base around sort of some of the nightclub theme as well. It's all going to be horror / crime, the same as kind of what I've done with A Hot Dose of Hell. But yeah, I'm partway through my trilogy collection that I'm doing. 3 different flavors, but still very much in the style of how I did A Hot Dose of Hell. So if people like A Hot Dose of Hell, then they'll enjoy what I've got coming next.
How long do you think it'll take you to get through all before we can see that in our hands?
I'm hoping for late summer. That's what I'm hoping for. As long as nothing else gets in the way. That's I'm most of the way through it. I've got last story to put together. I do have quite a slow pace of writing. I do obsess and agonize over sometimes just, I don't know if you do this, but sometimes just a single paragraph, and I might have spent all day on it.
I am the king of obsession when it comes to my writing, I'm afraid, yes. But yet you're still much more you're prolific by my standards anyway, at least. How long did it take you to write this one?
About 2 years.
Yeah,
Maybe
well,
a little bit
it
more.
shows. It is, there's 2 years of work there. And how long since you started writing the current trilogy?
Yeah, that's about, I started it as soon as I finished A Hot Dose of Hell, basically.
Okay.
So yeah, that's been about 2 years now, coming up.
And is it the trilogy set in the UK as well? Similar sort of.
Yeah, some of it's in Skarmouth again as well. It's basically sort of three horror tales, sort of cautionary tales, a little bit in the style of like, have you ever read any EC comics? You know, Tales from the Crypt, that kind of stuff.
I know of them, yeah.
Yeah, kind of like dodgy people getting their just desserts, a bit like A Hot Dose of Hell as well, really.
Yeah. Yeah, you won't be able to recycle any of the characters from A Hot Dose of Hell because there's nothing left of most
No,
of them.
hardly. Although I also have started to come up with ideas for a potential follow-on to that.
Oh, you did?
I don't know if I will pick it up or not. It's at the moment it's just a little idea. We'll see if it sticks around.
Well, I think there's whatever combination you put together will be good, because this one was very cleverly done. Last little extract. The heroine is meeting one of the Instagrammers called Jack, who I think, again, it's just a nice little summation of the experience we go through in our everyday lives these days. And this is Jack, said Poppy, indicating it to a person of indiscriminate sex. This one was also wearing thick rimmed specs with a baggy black hoodie and blue hair styled into a quiff Elvis himself would have envied. Overall, Rhonda thought the fine features and smooth, unstubbled skin could only belong to a female. Yet this was contradicted by overtly masculine body language and a kind of surly air more befitting a teenage lad. The mouth and nose, which might have proved the deciders were covered by a rainbow pattern fashion mask, through which Rhonda received a muffled hello. "And this is Trent," said Poppy, squeezing the lumberjack's narrow shoulder. "Hey girl," said Trent, "welcome to our posse." Posse, thought Rhonda, the term conjuring up images of rugged old cowboys, vicious bandits and torch-wielding vigilantes, the exact polar opposite of the group that was in front of her. Tell us about your views on masculinity. Having been literally in the front line for 10 years in nightclubs, you will have seen all aspects of masculinity, both the sort of sober and normal behavior, but also the extreme qualities that can be evinced when people are drunk. What's your view on masculinity in the world today, in Western society?
Well, Western society seems to be very anti-masculinity in terms of what's depicted in the culture, what's coming from the government, say. Whereas, people in general that you meet are very, they like masculinity as much as they like femininity. It's not every so often you come across someone who's a hardline feminist who really sort of that kind that hates men. But I think on the whole, real people respect the qualities of masculinity.
Yes, I think so. I think it's a top-down thing that they're forcing it on us, whether we want it or not. I imagine, I was just thinking now aloud, that the job of a bouncer in years to come, if this trend carries on, they won't need bouncers because everyone will be so timid and so castrated. There won't be any testosterone in the system to start with, and they'll all be sitting at home on their computers anyway, probably.
It seems like it's been a gradual move towards that. I did see a big shift in the culture during my time on the doors, and it started with the licensing for bouncers. That was the first one. They brought that in sort of the mid noughties, and that was the first big change. That was when a lot of the old veterans were turfed out the door straight away, and the only requisite to being on the door became having this license, not having any of the qualities needed to be a bouncer.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Oh, well, I'm sure there's a lot there you can explore in the next writing to come.
Yeah.
I've got to say, it sounds like the perfect job for an up-and-coming writer, being a bouncer, because it's you get a whole cross-section of life and classes and races and everything, and it's in your face, literally, isn't it? You have to deal with it, and it's instant. You don't have seconds or even minutes or even seconds to decide your position. It's just there in front of you. Last question, then. Did you call yourself, is Steve Stark your real name?
It actually is, yeah.
Is it? So yeah. I thought that maybe after you just said you liked the Parker books,
Richard Stark.
You've chosen Stark as a pseudonym.
Yeah, funny coincidence.
When I was hoping to getting my book published, I thought of using a pen name as well, and Stark was one of the choices that I came down to. All right, Steve. Well, thank you very much. It's been great chatting to you. It's a great, great book. I highly, highly recommend it to the listeners, and you'll have a good laugh. I'm still laughing. There's a scene where one of the homeless people gets in a car with all the Instagrammers, and it's only a short journey in the vehicle, but it still brings a chuckle every time I think of it. And the rest of the book is of equal high quality. So I'd like to congratulate you very much on achieving a very difficult task.
Thank you, Richard.
All the best.
Okay, cheers.
Bye.